Layers of reality. This might be a familiar statement to you. It might sound new or even odd in some way. What is a layer of reality? It's the idea or the experience that between us and the absolute, between us and God, between us and the infinite, that there are many gradations, that it's not the physical and the spiritual. In fact, the spiritual has many different gateways and levels and depths that can be traversed. This is one way that Kabbalah understands the nature of the world. These are concentric circles. There's many different layers, all leading from one to the other. Sometimes this is how the spiritual world is described in Kabbalah. These are layers of reality. Each of these layers here is a Sefirah, is a rung or a layer or a dimension that can be entered into. And everything is contained within everything else. You can imagine that if out here, let's say, was the infinite or true reality, that there would be a dimension that forms, which contains the next dimension, which forms. And so on a map like this, we'd be right here in the center. But it could also be described the other way out, that this is the center of everything and we're out here. But these are leading one to the other, to the other, to the other, like a ladder, if you're going to be journeying one layer at a time. And a much more familiar map, which many people have seen in exploring Kabbalah, is this model. This is sometimes called the tree of life. This is the world of the Sefirot, a map of the cosmos, both inner and outer. And though it's not known explicitly from the sources, a lot of people believe, and my sense certainly is, that these different qualities, which we're going to be exploring in this session, were discovered not through someone imagining what the world would be like if the spiritual world could be ordered in some way. These are encounters that people have had. These are experiences that people have had. This map is the reflection after a journey, after a spiritual encounter, or after perhaps a lifetime of spiritual encounter. That this is one way in which Jewish mystics have described what they have found. And as people who are learning about Jewish mysticism hundreds, if not thousands of years after this was developed, we can do both. We can have experiences and we can look at maps. We can see what came before, but our experiences won't always be able to fit in here. But regardless, this system, which is so central to the study of Kabbalah in particular, and all of the Jewish mysticism that has followed, it is my belief that it comes out of the experience of the deepening layers of reality as someone goes on a journey. So this classic image, you could call a Sefirah, if you were going to translate that word in terms of meaning, you could call it something like a divine emanation, that the infinite shows up in the world in many different ways, not just as pure infinity. In fact, it's understood that if human beings were to encounter pure infinity, if the pure God, pure reality, it would be overwhelming. And so there are ways in which the divine manifests, and also an order in which the structures are developed slowly so that we can have an existence that is simultaneously independent of true reality and also with the possibility to have access to these layers. So the Kabbalists in the Middle Ages, when this system was first getting articulated and written down, had somewhat of a theological issue, because Judaism, certainly at that point, was very strongly and strictly monotheistic. And how many circles do we have here on this page? We have, well, there's 10, and then there's sort of like an imaginary 11th in the middle, dot. But that's not one. Like, we have one God. So what are these? What is this spiritual realm? How many different layers? And so understanding these as articulations, as manifestations of the one true reality is often how the Kabbalists explain what was going on here. One comparison that can be made that's fairly accurate, even though it's not often how people think about it, that Hinduism is often thought of as polytheistic, but in fact, in many of the schools within Hinduism, like the people who worship Vishnu, for example, the Vaishnavites, they see Vishnu as the supreme reality and all of the other gods as manifestations of that supreme reality. So those gods, in a sense, have these independent existence and qualities, but really they're all one. And really they derive their power, they derive their reality from Vishnu. And so similarly, these emanations, which we'll be going into detail in one by one, they all have an independent nature, but they're all very much empowered and derived from that same infinite reality where it all begins. So sometimes in this kind of chart, people imagine, or they would place the infinite up here above Keter. It's sort of descending down gradually into our world. And the way that often I like to, how I understand it, how I like to explain it is that the infinite, Ein Sof, it's called, without end, true reality, God, you could say in the most pure sense, is not above Keter. God is equally in every area of this tree of life. And in fact, can be seen as the actual paper that this is written on, or the screen that it's written on. That Ein Sof, the infinite, is equally found in our world as well, in all of these dimensions, all of these layers. And some would even go so far to say that Ein Sof, the infinite, is so beyond comprehension that you could say it is all of this put together and none of it simultaneously. And every paradox you could imagine, that it's truly beyond understanding. But to simply place the infinite above here doesn't do justice to the nature of the infinite. Because if the infinite was really infinite, would it just be above Keter? Would it just be at the very top of the emanation tree? So to try and understand the infinite and Ein Sof through a chart like this is somewhat of a futile task, but sometimes metaphors can be helpful in that journey, regardless. And so now I want to look in this Kabbalistic creation narrative, the order in which things are often described as manifesting. That it all starts off as undifferentiated infinity, and slowly something starts to come into being. So at the beginning, the first thing to appear, even before there's something, what appears in fact is nothing, nothingness. That Keter, this top quality, which literally means crown in Hebrew, and some people associate also with the crown chakra. I am hesitant to align these two systems one to one because I think there are important differences between them, and I'm okay with not every mystical system saying the same thing. But it is interesting. It's also called crown and Keter. It is often associated with the very first proto thoughts that could happen in the divine mind. That before anything exists, there's this impulse, this will, this creative urge for something to manifest. But it hasn't even manifested yet. Before there can be something, there has to be nothing. And the infinite is not something or nothing. And so the very first reality which comes into being from the divine progression into our world is nothingness. It is a realm associated heavily with paradox as well. And in fact, it's said that Keter is half embedded within the infinite, such that some Kabbalists, especially earlier on, are debating, is Keter even different than Ein Sof? Is there a difference between this nothingness and the true infinity of reality? So this is stage one. And we go from Keter into what's known as Chokhmah. Chokhmah literally means wisdom, and there are so many names for each of these realms. Sometimes they're more obvious why they're named that than others. Chokhmah being, in some older biblical realities, this quality which seems to pre-exist the world as well. Like it has almost a partnership in the creation. And there's a point here, literally, this white point in this case, whatever it was, it is the first grain of somethingness. It is what's said to be a dimensionless point, something so primordial that it might not even be considered something to most people today, but it wasn't nothing. This was the very first seed of reality. And this, like Keter and like the next quality of Bina, these top three are considered to be in the world of what's called thought or spirit. They're beyond tangible, you could say, spirituality. So if what I am describing right now seems really esoteric or beyond comprehension and grasp in some way, it's because it is. This is a point if there's a journey from the physical world to the infinite, entering into these top three is a point where a lot of the categories break down, and a lot of our conceptions of what's tangible and describable and all of those things, it doesn't really have the same meaning in this world. And so this is a dimensionless point. This is the smallest somethingness that could possibly exist, which couldn't even be said to have any real manifested quality beyond that, beyond this being the seed for existence itself. And what comes next, and this chokhmah, by the way, is also known as the supernal, or the divine father. What comes next is a circle forms around it, like a womb or like an egg. And this is the divine mother. This is Bina, literally understanding. But Bina has to do with this quality also of discernment, the process of understanding, you could say, on our own minds, which leads to insight, but through inquiry. If chokhmah is a flash, then Bina is a process of germination and of developing that flash into something more tangible. Bina is seen as the mother of the spiritual world, in the sense that what comes next is birthed from Bina. Bina is the origin. It's the mother of the middle reality of the Sephirotic tree, and is associated with it's called the world of Tshuva, the world of return. And for some, it's the world of, in an experiential sense, developing sort of the horizontal qualities of relationship and self-cultivation through digging deep into who we are in a transformational sense, versus some of the other qualities which have to do with that upward journey. So nothingness leads to somethingness. Somethingness leads to this birthing chamber. And from that begins to descend the other Sefirot. Da'at is this mystical 11th Sefirah, which is included in some charts and not included in others. Sometimes Da'at appears and Keter is excluded. Chokhmah is on the top. There's a lot of different ways in which this system manifests, but in a sense, this Chokhmah, Bina, and Da'at can form a triad. If Chokhmah is this flash, you could say experientially this flash of insight, Bina is this discernment phase, Da'at is a unification. It's a place where we become that. Da'at, biblically, the first time it is used in the whole Bible, this word, which means knowledge, it's used in the first book, the book of Genesis. It says Adam knew his wife Eve, knew, knowledge, like lada'at, to know. So knowledge is associated with union, literally, physical union in that case, but mystically, Da'at is associated with mystical union. And one of the explanations for why Da'at is a sort of a Sefirah and sort of isn't, it's because it's naturally embedded in many of the other Sefirot, which involve a unification process, that the ones to follow, the next 6, are divine qualities in a more tangible way than what's up here, that can be unified with experientially. In the same way that story at the beginning is someone that I knew who unified with this gevura, this boundaries, this power. It kind of unified with who he was and his actions in that moment. Each of these has that quality and the ability to be unified with. So this is one way in which it's understood that Da'at kind of lies behind the other Sefirot. And now we're getting into something more tangible. So this is chesed, this is love, loving kindness, this is giving, this is saying yes. You can imagine a divine quality. It's one thing to say I love you, let's say, but can you imagine being filled with divine love? That might look like someone who doesn't have much to give and gives anyways. Chesed is a bountiful overflowing. It is saying giving is what is aligned. It is reaching out to the other for help. I mean, with a helping hand. It's giving, it's overflowing, it's expansive. All of those qualities are within chesed. And this is the kind of thing that people can tap into. It's possible to do certain types of practices, for example, where sometimes we're working with our own mind and then suddenly it feels like there's something that comes from beyond. And when something comes from beyond, that's one of the ways of understanding these Sefirot, these divine qualities, whether it's through prayer, through journaling, or really any practice. Sometimes it's like something else lands with us. And that's this more tangible realm. If the top three are associated with the divine mind, this is associated with divine speech. It's something that's being articulated. It is possible to describe chesed. It really is. It might feel also esoteric in some way, but compared to something like keter, chokhmah, it has a tangibility that's involved in it. And so chesed is yes, it's bountiful, it's overflowing, it's kind, it's loving, it's generous. Gevura, its antipole, is about saying no. It's about limiting. It's a limiting force that balances chesed out. One of the reasons this Sephirotic tree is presented in this fashion is because there was a need, it seems, in some creation stories about the universe, that there was actually a need for these things to be balancing each other. So if it was a direct ladder, that kind of onion model I was showing before, there might be a sense of overwhelm. But in this case, so you can imagine that if someone was nothing but chesed, if they had nothing but overflowing yes all of the time, someone might take advantage of that. Or maybe if they were raising children and it was just yes, of course, absolutely. Eventually those children might become spoiled. And on the other side, Gevura, stop, it's no. And it's no in the best sense possible. If it's in balance, no is needed. We need to say no sometimes. And if you only say no to a child forever, that's probably some sort of abuse. Or certainly that's not going to be a very happy child. No, we can't do this. No, we can't do that. No, you can't have this. So the actual balance is what's required. Interestingly, and I don't agree with this 100%, but the Zohar, the magnum opus of medieval Kabbalah, says that evil, so to speak, evil is derived from when Gevura is separated from the rest of the tree. So this quality of saying no, if it gets so far away from love and all the other balances, that it starts to become wrath and anger. And so when horrible things are happening in the world, Kabbalists understand that as, Gevura is not in balance with the rest of the tree. Similarly, though the Zohar doesn't talk about this, to my knowledge, being the origin of other types of evil, if any of these qualities get imbalanced, we might end up in a tricky situation or something's misaligned. So if someone only has loving kindness, they're not going to be able to exist terribly well day to day when there's people who are going to be trying to take advantage of them, for example. And if someone had, let's say, someone was tapping into nothingness and paradox all the time, maybe a lot of the daily responsibilities that they're faced with would seem meaningless, but that's not particularly aligned for people who have responsibilities, for example. It doesn't matter, nothing matters, everything is empty, everything's nothing. That's not really what it looks like to have an integrated connection with Keter consciousness, with this nothingness. All of these are needed, as we'll see. And so the central axis in the entire picture here actually is Tiferet, which is all about balance. It has this quality. So if someone can balance Chesed and Gevura, they have the quality of Tiferet. It's the quality of discerning which of these is most appropriate at any given moment. It is like a channel, a conduit, which can allow certain energies through depending on the moment. You maybe have had the experience of interacting with someone, and let's say you're someone who leans naturally towards chesed. A lot of us do. Not everyone. There's people who lean naturally towards gevura, let's say. But let's say we're a chesed leaning person and someone's talking to us. And even though we'd love to say yes, because people who lean to chesed love to say yes, we know that the answer is no. And we need to say that. So Tiferet allows us to like open up the channel, so to speak, to that natural no, to let that through, because that's what's needed. And sometimes gevura, this power, this boundaries, is exactly what's needed for the sake of balance. And Tiferet being the central axis of this entire structure speaks to that. There is something essential about balance in Jewish mysticism. It's a teaching that arises partially out of being a householder, out of being someone who needs to work, let's say, or take care of others. It is tempting, I think, for a lot of spiritual practitioners to want to be chesed people all the time. And it, on some level, is a really great thing. But if we're all chesed all the time, we might need to kind of leave society to be fully functional and effective. That the balance of gevura is an ingredient which sometimes can be hard to find. I can say in other mystical systems that I've encountered, but Judaism really emphasizes it because it's about balance, and we need to say no. We need to say there's a time for this and a time for that. I can't do that right now. I have to do this. That's part of the householder, the in society, in civilization experience, and it includes the mystical life. It's not just about being loving, actually. That some people call Tiferet true love. That if we raise a child with the healthy balance of yes and no, they become the best person that they can be. That's true love. That's true kindness. It's empowering them to step into their own in a way that pure yes just cannot do. So we get now into the lower four, and in fact, between Chesed and Yesod, or maybe you could say between Da'at and Yesod, are considered a unit, which we'll see at the end with the four worlds. But Netzach, Hod, and Yesod, especially Netzach and Hod, are not always so described so clearly in early Kabbalah. So I'm going to be drawing on later mysticism to flesh these out. But sometimes Netzach, Hod, and Yesod in earlier Kabbalah are just seen as conduits for these qualities. You could see Gevura and Hod linking up, Tiferet and Yesod, Chesed and Netzach linking up. And that is one way of understanding them. They are just conduits for the divine heart, you could say, or for the divine world of speech. But there's been a lot said since those earlier times. And Netzach, which could be translated as eternity, some people translate it as victory, takes on this association with divine action. So we can imagine someone who seems to be able to get things done. They can go and go and go, and it's like there's nothing stopping them. Maybe, maybe hopefully they're working towards the good, if you know what I mean, but they just have a ton of energy, and it doesn't feel like stressed energy. They just have this quality of working. It's almost like marching forward towards eternity, towards victory, going on forever. The Energizer Bunny. Yeah, that's Netzach. And its antipole, its balance, is Hod, and Hod has to do with yielding, with waiting for the right time. You can think of someone in conversation who loves to fill the gaps with saying something. That's a more Netzach quality, you could say. It's definitely not Hod. Hod waits for opportunities. Hod knows when it's time to be patient. Hod is also, it literally means splendor, but it's also related to the word for gratitude. That Netzach is about let's do things, and Hod is appreciation. These are balances. And again, this is describable. I can say, the womb of all existence, and you might say, huh? But if I said gratitude and yielding, and you can unify, imagine like the most patient quality you could imagine. That's a divine quality of Hod, of just patient knowing and waiting and being okay with not doing, non-action in a as holy, sacred way as you can imagine. Yesod in a more, I guess, say practical sense, as opposed to being the conduit through which everything is channeled. All of the Sefirot are said to come through Yesod. A quality which it can be associated with in a more practical way is communication, transmission, relationship. It's about connection. You can think of a really good teacher embodies that quality of Yesod. There can be a whole lot of other things, let's say, behind them, but they're able to gather it up and transmit it in such a way that it can be received. People who are in relationship with each other, whatever kind of relationship, a family, a spouse, a romantic relationship, friends, any kind of relationship, there's a way in which we can communicate so that we can be heard, or at least to max out the potential of being heard, because that connection needs to be there. Sometimes there's so much in the waiting. We could say it all at once, let's hear, or maybe we won't say any of it. That's to some degree a misalignment of the quality of Yesod, of letting that flow through in a way to the external world, right? And it's the way that kind of the infinite eventually channels this into a place where we're able to comprehend and to grasp. And Yesod is associated with, if all of these Sefirot can be a tree, there can be a lot of different metaphors, but they can also be the divine body. Really, this is how it's described in a lot of Kabbalah, like a body, a spiritual body. And Yesod is the genitals. This is the connection point. And some people also understand Yesod, someone who has a healthy relationship to their own sexuality, that's in balance, we could say, that's not overwhelmed or suppressed in one way or another. That's a quality of Yesod. And lastly, Yesod has to do with this quality of the tzaddik, the righteous one, a teacher, a mystic, someone who's in tune, accessing and being in positive relationship to Yesod, including sexual energy, but not limited to it, communication, all of these things. That tzaddik forms that role in the world. They are associated with Yesod. Each of these qualities has biblical characters associated with them. It has divine names associated with them. This is a very, and in fact, sometimes you'll see these mixed up in different ways. This is a very kind of the essential premise of the Sefirot is what I'm presenting here, but it's a very flexible system. It's actually a lot of fun. I mean that. There's a lot of potential for free association and experimentation. And though Kabbalah has a lot of practices with it and is very tied in classically with Jewish practice and all of that, one of the most popular ways that Kabbalah has found its place in broader society and broader global spirituality is these kinds of schemas, these kinds of systems, these kinds of ways of understanding the different elements of reality. So it's a very fertile system, so to speak. And the last quality is Malchut. Malchut is a quality of receiving of everything that Yesod has to give. There are ways in which it feels like Malchut could be our world. And, some people talk about that Malchut actually is the kingdom, so to speak, or the kingship or something like that. And I think usually Malchut is associated with the closest thing in to our physical world from the divine reality. It is, for some people understand it as the energy field that surrounds people, or the sort of a person when they first open up to spirituality, they're often accessing Malchut, this quality. Sometimes Malchut is also called the Shekhinah. It is very much a quality that can arrive, and as much Yesod transmits everything that's above, but Malchut is something which we can then tap into. It's said to not have any light of its own. There's a lot of mystical metaphor. Malchut, it's also called Shekhinah, is the divine presence. People say that when you're speaking with people in a holy way, this Malchut quality, the Shekhinah quality, can rest between you. It's possible to tap into that in meditation, in a group context, and individually. And Malchut is understood as the first access point, the opening of the tent into this world through which other qualities can land. So this is sort of a journey down. And ultimately, in the same way that the infinite births Keter, this world of thought, and then Keter ultimately births Binah, which then births the spiritual realm, if you will, Malchut births the physical world. It is the lower mother, it's called. This is the upper mother, this is the lower mother, and it's what inevitably allows our world to exist and to be created. So this is the 10 or 11 dimensions, the rungs, the ladder, the divine qualities. as a journey downwards. And each of these, of course, can be a journey up as well. And that's the ascent. That's from our perspective upwards. We start with Malchut, we get into these qualities and move up and up. Another way that this system can be understood, which is in a lot of ways quite a practical division for humanity, is that these different layers of reality can be divided up into the four worlds. And those are the physical world, you could say, or the world of what's called Asiyah, the world of action, body. And this is both understood today as the most embodied of the spirit, the most embodied of the divine realm, Malchut, the very bottom, the closest thing to your physical world. This is sort of the world of action for the divine, where it's all going to come into existence and manifest. And also on a personal level, one of the worlds is our bodies, physical body. This is one dimension of our being. This is the place where actions occur, where things happen, where we can introspect into our very physicality. As opposed to another one of the worlds, the emotional world. The emotions are different than the body, the heart, so to speak, the emotional realm. Yeah, there's overlaps, and all of these could be said to be one in a sense as well. But the Four Worlds teaching shows that this central realm, as I was describing the world of speech, the world of manifest, more tangibility in the divine world, before it's all coming into full actualization, this is like the heart of God. And so too, it's the world of Yetzirah, the world of formation, where things are becoming more tangible than that world of mind, that world of spirit, pure spirit. And we can think about this as relational as well. Like we can have a physical body, but we have an emotional realm. And this is where socialization happens. These worlds can be both, metaphorically perhaps, or experientially cosmic, and they can also be very much reflection tools that we can use. How is my physical health? How is my emotional health? What are my physical goals this year? What are my emotional goals? How am I doing on all of these? Or if I'm meeting somebody, how do we align physically? How do we align emotionally? Yeah, the third world is the mental, the mind, associated sometimes with awe or this sense of wow, associated with the sphere of Bina. It's called Bria, creation. It's where it's all being created. Yeah, like a womb. It's all happening there right at the beginning. And in this system, the mind is different than the heart. Emotions and thoughts. We can have expansive thoughts. Yeah, but that doesn't mean we have an expansive heart. It doesn't mean we have an expansive love, let's say, or expansive ability to tap into how we're truly feeling or how we're truly doing. Our society, in many ways, is a mind society. We are better, seemingly, at ideas and innovations and technology and science than so many, certainly past civilizations. But are we better at bodily health? Are we better at emotional health? Are we better at spiritual well-being? The world of the mind is both thought and that sense of when the mind can really be open to anything that could be a sense of awe, but also a sense of consciousness or a sense of presence. And the fourth world, sometimes divided into two, is the spiritual, so to speak. This is like the spiritual of the spiritual in the Sephirotic realm. And for us, it's the difference between our physical bodies, our emotional world, our mind, our intellect, our thoughts, and those moments when we see beyond, the veil, whether that's it's intuition or moments of connection, dveikut, they'd say, right? Mystical experience. That's where we're entering into the spiritual reality. And it's divided into two. Sometimes it's the five worlds, and the last world, being associated with Keter exclusively, has to do with this almost paradoxical spirituality that people can encounter past the tangible spirituality, so to speak, is when they're entering into something that where all these categories fall down. So to be more, again, pragmatic, this spiritual world is known as Atzilut. It means emanation. So it's our spirit. There's body, heart, mind, and spirit. And each of these, again, can be seen as part of this divine world. Part of the divine reality, the four worlds, the four dimensions within this Sephirotic universe, but they're also parts of ourselves. And when we're making decisions, for example, how do I feel about this? How does my body feel when I think about this particular investment I want to make, or this retreat I want to go on? How does my heart feel? And what do I think? Does this rationally make sense? Is this a good idea? And if I just tune in and get quiet, is there an insight that comes? Is there some kind of answer that comes from beyond? And how can I take all of that information together and move forward in the most holistic way? That's the four worlds. They are initially in Kabbalah described in the Sephirotic universe, but as things pass from generation to generation, perhaps even in the beginnings, though it was unspoken, it becomes very practical and experiential and personable and personal. All of these Sefirot are both divine cosmic realities that are beyond our possible grasp. You know what I mean? All of that stuff. And simultaneously, they're very immanent, they're very real, they're very personable, they're very practical. And in all of those ways, we can relate to Kabbalah, the Sephirotic system, the layers of reality, and really the whole Jewish mystical tradition. That's all of the above. It's inclusive of any way we could want to contemplate or understand. They're very personal, they're very transcendent, and everything in between. And so this is the journey down, so to speak, and the divisions into the worlds. But it's also a ladder up. And what can start with Malchut or entrance into this reality, it's a whole journey. It's in many ways a never-ending journey, but the work of the experience of Jewish mysticism is about entering into this world, understanding what we're ready for, what we need to hold back from, how to build spiritual capacities in ourselves and journey slowly in the most integrated way, ideally integrated, where it's a householder tradition. Again, it's about that balance, maintaining stability as much as we can so that we can have this exploration while simultaneously being able to be into positive relationship and holding down our responsibilities from day to day. And so in the next class, we're going to be looking at one of these journeys into this realm beyond, from the Baal Shem Tov, from the founder of the Hasidic movement. They're particularly transcendent for this transcending unit and profound journey. And until then, I wish everyone many blessings on finding what's next for them in their path towards whatever is lying beyond, just beyond the next step for them. The teachings you just watched are part of a larger series on an online course called Introduction to Jewish Mysticism. If you're interested to learn more, see the link in the description below this video.